Could you describe your father and mother's immigration story and what it was like growing up in poverty? And Emilio, in parallel, could you discuss how Dad's experience affected him and you, and a funny story or two being raised by your wonderful dad?
Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. My father was born in Spain, and actually his birthday was significant because it was July 2nd, 1898. And I always thought that, and I was told it was the very day the United States declared war on Spain. And Hope did some research on it and said, no, it was a few weeks earlier. So thank you so much, Hope. About that. But word hadn't gotten to Galicia yet, you know. And my dad was explained to us that, you know, Galicia was so isolated and so poverty-stricken and so, you know, there was no infrastructure. So it took a shorter time to get to the New World on a ship leaving from Vigo than it did to get on a horse or a cart and get to Madrid. So he took the shorter route to the New World. And he landed in Port of New York, but they didn't stay. He had a cousin with him, and they went to Cuba. So he stayed in Cuba for a couple of years working in the sugarcane fields. And he came in through Miami as a Cubano and worked his way up to Dayton, Ohio, because he'd heard about this factory. The National Cash Register Company was hiring there, and they were welcoming immigrants. Most of them were Italians, and he was one of the only Spaniards. But at any rate, that's how he got to Dayton. My mother came from this little village in Borisacane in northern Tipperary, and she was her whole family were very involved in the War of Independence, and her brother Michael was a volunteer for the Irish, the IRA, and we discovered was a carrier for the IRA, carrying messages. She spoke Gaelic, which was a big a telltale sign, because Gaelic was not taught in the schools. It was the language of the IRA. It's how they could communicate without the Brits knowing what they were saying. They still don't know what they're saying. But at any rate, they saw a civil war coming in 1922, and they sent my mother to the United States to stay with a cousin, knowing the fighting would end soon one way or another. Either it would be a free state or it would be a united republic. And so she came to stay with this cousin in Dayton. And meanwhile, she met this, what she called the Spaniard, and they fell in love, and she stayed, and they became citizens together. In the old days, you used to go to what they called citizenship school, and she taught him how to speak English. He couldn't speak English. And they were married in 1927. They had 12 pregnancies, 10 survived, 9 boys, 1 girl. I'm a 7th son. And he was sent to Bogota, Colombia for a while because he spoke Spanish. They lost a baby there. She got pregnant again and was afraid to lose another one. So her mother was ailing. She went back to Ireland to stay with her. And my oldest brother, Manuel, was born in Ireland. And then he got reassigned to Bermuda. And they moved to Bermuda, and 5 more lads came. Then the war came, and Bermuda belonged to the Brits, and the Brits were already in it, but the United States wasn't yet in 1940, so they came back to the United States, and I was the first Yank born here. And what was your question?
You answered it.
Oh, God.
There are probably 2 or 3 other books that could come out of this guy. Wouldn't you agree, Hope? the stories that didn't end up.
And Emilio, in parallel, could you discuss how Dad's experience affected him and you, and a funny story or two being raised by your wonderful dad, who always has stories, is always so funny?
There's not so many funny ones, but I'm sure you can find one, Emilio.
Well, you know, you say you're wonderful, Dad, and it's absolutely true.
Oh, here it comes.
It's absolutely true. You know, if you pay attention, you turn on the TV, or you go to movies these days, or you know, watch sitcoms, fathers are often displayed as doofuses, as clueless, and oftentimes that is where young people are taught how to treat their parents, how to look at their fathers. I never did. I grew up watching him struggle. I grew up watching he and my mother both struggle. I was born here in the city when they didn't have a dime. And so I was very fortunate to watch the two of them develop. And in many ways, the three of us grew up together. I felt like, and over the years, I really felt like a contemporary of theirs. Robert Bly writes about in his book Iron John about how during the Industrial Revolution, young men were left at home while the fathers went to the factory and went off, and they'd come back at the end of the day with contempt for the boss, and they were left with their temperament rather than the ability to gain insight and to gain knowledge from their fathers. All that was stripped away. They no longer worked side by side with them in the fields. By insisting that we go with them, by insisting that if he got a job on the FBI or some other show that he was doing at the time, or performing at Joe Papp's Theater, he insisted that we go. We stand by his side. We learn what he's doing. We understand what he's doing, more importantly. And so I'm grateful for all of those lessons. I'm grateful that he included me